Hey everybody, this is Kit Cabello with Hard Lens Media. We have a very special interview. For the second time joining us on Hard Lens Media is the founder of Mi Casa Su Casa, Just Informed, community activist and grassroots leader as well, Niko House. He's been involved in a lot of coverage of the 2016 election cycle, as well as going into 2020. He's already growing into a very large leader in regards to the progressive community and independent media. So Niko, thank you so much for joining us. Please introduce yourself to our viewers and subscribers.
What's going on, everybody? Shout out to you guys, man. I see y'all been putting in a lot of work, and I'm glad it's starting to finally be noticed. In case y'all didn't know, Hard Lens definitely has my personal full-throated endorsement. They do great coverage, not only of national politics, but also the stuff that happens in Chicago, which is very, very important and does have national implications. They do great coverage of that stuff too. So thanks for all the work you guys have been doing.
Hey, we appreciate it. Look, I think we both understand the difficulties of setting up an independent media network, especially in this day and age of censorship, corporate media, corporate bias, and the establishment talking points. So I think what a lot of our viewers and subscribers want to know, specifically going into 2020, is what have you seen firsthand in regards to how progressive candidates like Bernie Sanders and Tulsi Gabbard are being treated by the media? Because everything that we've seen is that they're favoring people like Kamala Harris or Amy Klobuchar or Cory Booker. And I just want to get your opinion on what's happening right now.
Well, they're lying, so there's that. Oh, as always. And where they aren't lying, they're purposely misframing and misdirecting people. I was just talking to Katie Halper. We were talking about the fact that, for example, that poll that came out the other day that the Intercept released about Bernie outpacing Kamala Harris amongst black voters 2-1 right now. And it was interesting to me because if it was Kamala beating Bernie 2-1, oh God, it would be everywhere. But I mean, they've been talking about quote unquote Bernie's black problem since he's announced. They've been talking about that Kamala Harris is a favorite amongst black voters since she's announced. If she even announced on MLK Day, she's tried to make this a black thing. She tried to portray herself as being black, and the media went right along with playing into that. So when this poll comes out, it's not like Intercept is not a popular publication.
Right.
A lot of people talked about it. I talked about it. For them to basically ignore it and then continue to perpetuate the same quote unquote Bernie bro narrative that all of his supporters are these white, middle-aged, rich Bernie are white guys, like it's a lie, but it's also disingenuous. And I want to be very clear about how I feel about this. This is how systemic racism looks, and people don't really get that. Systemic racism isn't all about legislation and laws. Isn't necessarily about who does and does not get hired, although those are obviously parts of it. Who doesn't and doesn't get into a school. Systemic racism it can take a form like what we see this year and what we saw in the 2016 election. They knew that Bernie was better for black people. They knew this. But because of the private prison money that's invested into Hillary Clinton, some of it in the media as well, because of the power that because in order for a lot of communities a lot of the industries in these communities thrive on imprisoning black people, keeping black people working in Walmarts, Targets, minimum wage jobs. They knew that if they don't hear about Bernie from the mainstream, then there's a good probability that because of all the hours that black people are forced to work, they don't have time to be going on social media and figuring out who the best presidential candidate is. They're worried about paying bills. And for them to know that Bernie wanted to pull them out of their current situation, give them economic empowerment, speaking to black issues, not in general, but very specifically, that is what systemic racism looks like. Right. Because they knew who was better, and they were purposely saying this woman who gets paid by private prisons to throw black people in jail, she's better for you.
Now, here's an interesting concept we got to look at, is that we've both seen the same town hall that was hosted by Wolf Blitzer, where, Bernie Sanders was asked questions by lobby groups or people associated with some of the lobby groups in Washington, D.C., but also there was a question that presented to Bernie Sanders, which was reparations. And I think it's an important conversation to have, but from the way Wolf Blitzer and CNN and all the other media outlets were portraying is that Bernie Sanders is clueless about the idea of reparations. And the thing is, like, they use that in many ways to say that he's going to have a problem getting the African American vote. What is the situation that that Bernie Sanders and his campaign can do to really take away that narrative from corporate media? Does Bernie Sanders have a problem reaching out to African American voters, especially when CNN has such a large platform and how they?
So I think that. So that's a hard one for Bernie's campaign specifically. Right. The reason why is because I don't think it's Bernie's. I think that's where we come into play. I don't think Bernie's answer was correct on reparations, but I am also not naive. If the Democratic Party actually wanted to pass reparations, and it was a possibility that it could actually get done, it wouldn't be talked about. It wouldn't be discussed. If Kamala Harris actually intended on passing Medicare for all, she wouldn't talk about it, nor would, and also when she did finally discuss it, she would have gotten more pushback from the mainstream establishment. And was it Jake Tapper who held her town hall? But she didn't get any pushback, not any serious pushback anyway. So just like now when they talk about issues of race in the Democratic Party, they don't plan on doing anything about it. So it's very easy to talk about it. People forget that this discussion that we're constantly having about race and how it will play into the outcome of an election, this has literally never happened, ever, before Bernie Sanders.
Right.
But, there were people who talked about race, but there was nobody. So it's funny, ironic even, that now they're talking about the issues that Bernie Sanders has spoken about and brought into the mainstream and co-opting the message of helping black people into the guise of reparations. Kamala's not for reparations, but there are articles trying to claim she is. Elizabeth Warren is not for reparations, but there are articles trying to claim that she is. So our job as the media is to clarify that what they're for. They're talking about quote unquote investing in the black community. I hate to break this to you, but unless you're talking about like Atlanta, and that's basically it. There might be 3 other well-established black communities around the country. There is no quote-unquote black community. We don't have ownership of shit. Remember redlining? That literally prevented us from owning anything. And that's one of the big fallacies with Bernie's even answer, is that there is a black community to invest in. Kamala wouldn't even know. But we have a tangential network of black people. There's a black culture. But the black community that they're talking about investing in doesn't really exist outside of a few, very, very few pockets around the country. And so because we don't have ownership, there is no way to invest in our rental properties that we're renting from people. And so when Bernie, for example, says things like he could better educate himself on what not to say, like, oh, a check wouldn't help anybody. That's a lie. A check would help out a lot.
I agree with that.
I got bills that could use a check right now. That if I had the freedom to pursue this 100% of the time, just like I'm sure you feel like I'd be unstoppable. Like to be able to focus on the issues rather than how I'm going to pay my bills and focus on. And now I can talk about all the things that black people have gone through and things like that, or just the establishment and progressive, all the things that people want to be able to do but can't because of bills. The businesses that they want to invest in because they don't have, but like Bernie talks about racist credit scores. They're true. There are racist credit scores, and even racist loan practices where they won't even give loans in some cases. And he says, we're going to get rid of those racist loan practices. Okay, that's cool, Bernie. How the fuck am I going to get the loan? I ain't got 20%. I got to have 20% to even think about getting a loan. You want to get rid of racist credit scores. That's great, Bernie, but I don't have money to pay off the debt that I have accrued now.
Right.
Because I was being given a higher percentage in interest than my white counterparts with the exact same credit score. Like those saying a check doesn't fix anything when I know for a fact gentrification is only able to be pursued because of redlining. Redlining kept us out of the small business market significantly in the metropolitan areas. So when we finally kind of got a redlining, somewhat, we're finally doing a little better in our communities. We finally got a little bit of ownership. Guess what? Doesn't matter because we haven't made enough capital to stop corporations from coming in and investors from coming in and flipping the little bit of improvement that we've made and in reaping 100, 200, 300% profit. Because if we had the capital and had the money and could get those loans before 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago, guess what? Property taxes are already high. The condos have already been built. The businesses are already wildly successful. So it makes no financial sense for you to come in and try to flip something that would yield you little to no profit and our communities remain our communities. That's what a check does.
Right. So here's something that we have to address then, because this seems like a much bigger issue that not only the president of the United States has to solve. Like, this is something that's going to require congressional congressional action. So the thing is, going to 2020, it's quite clear that, you know, the presidential election cycle is going to definitely get most of the media attention. But is there a chance or opportunity for progressives that are going to be running for 2020 seats able to get at least a foothold onto, you know, getting into their respective primaries, winning, and potentially going into the general election and winning as well? Because we've seen from the Democratic establishment that they're already trying to primary against AOC, Tulsi Gabbard, Representative Ilhan Omar, and already, like, if you're a progressive and you're going to call out the neoliberal establishment system, they're going to primary against you. And we already saw how many progressive candidates from 2018 were kicked off the ballot, those who associate with the Justice Democrats, Brand New Congress, or Our Revolution. So what will it really take for there to be a real big political movement for these progressive candidates that are going to run in 2020 for House seats or United States Senate seats?
Funny enough, I think that AOC is safe. I think that Ilhan Omar is actually safer than AOC is, because people don't know that not only did that community vote for her, but a lot of that community voted for her because she is Somalian. And her biggest opponent, the Republican opponent, was even Somalian. So, like, it would take a lot for them to go up. But the Somalian people, and the reason can I just say real quick before I go down that rabbit hole, the funniest part about Ilhan Omar, because it's kind of related to the progressive world, isn't it ironic that the CIA has been involved in Somalia for quite some time? The reason that we took in refugees from Somalia and put them in places like Minnesota, Vermont, some in New Hampshire, Wisconsin, these are places where they are basically being isolated from the rest of society, so nobody asks why they're here. Because if you ask why they're here, then what? You figure out, oh shit, we've been messing around in their communities like we have everywhere else. So you isolate them, right? But then this thing happens where one girl just gets tired of everybody's bullshit, and then she runs for office. And because of all of the experiences that she has had as a refugee, that she has had as a Somalian, that she has had as a woman of color, that she has had as a Muslim woman, basically, you go down a list of everybody we persecuted over the last 100 years, comes into fruition as Ilhan Omar, and she gets in Congress, and they're like so happy, oh man, she's diverse, and then she gets in Congress. Y'all are some murdering bastards who all need to be held accountable. Why can't we trust anything you say? I see what you did to my country. I see what you did. So they went out of their way to hide her instead of integrating the Somalians into our various communities, and they isolated her in a district where the Somalians put her up to speak. And now she's speaking out against the very establishment that has caused the displacement of Somalians and push them to be in places like Minnesota. I just find it hilariously ironic. Right. But going back to the progressive, the way you do it is still, once again, doing what Ilhan Omar does, doing what AOC does, doing what Bernie and Tulsi does. You got to speak to your experiences. And oftentimes, more often than not, people agree with progressive values. Whether or not they call them progressive values, it's a whole different thing. But if you go to the average person who isn't really politically active, but they still vote regularly, and say, how you feel about having Medicare for all? Of course, why wouldn't I? What's the problem with that? They don't say, like on Twitter, oh, you're a Marxist, you're a socialist. They don't care about those labels. Labels don't pay bills, especially medical bills. So you have to speak truth to power. Once again, we have our part to play as media. And then you just kind of, I feel like in this election specifically, it's so important that people don't take a back seat and just vote. Voting is the last step. People have always said when Trump got in office, or when you won't support the neoliberal that they're I wouldn't support Beto O'Rourke. I refuse to, because I knew what he was. Or I wouldn't support Andrew Gillum. Saying, well, what are you doing? Who are you going to vote for? And they conflate voting and change and don't really include everything else. And I'm like, if you think that you're going to affect the outcome of this election just by merely voting, you're about 7 steps late to how you could have affected the outcome of this election.
And speaking of candidates, too, that are also being attacked, let's talk about another presidential candidate, Tulsi Gabbard. Ever since she's made her announcement, the establishment has constantly been talking her down or portraying her or associating with her groups that that really she has no association with at all. Like, for example, there was an MSNBC article that said that she was a Russian stooge because she was supported or
NBC article.
NBC article. Thank you. Yeah. But that was recently debunked by Glenn Greenwald of The Intercept, where it stated that she, just because RT America or Sputnik said some nice words about Tulsi Gabbard, and then they also talk about other endorsements or her recent fact-finding mission in Syria, they constantly portray her as something that she is not. And it seems that anytime you have a candidate like Tulsi Gabbard really talk about foreign policy, they're automatically discredited by the corporate media. So the thing is, with somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, what is the possibility of her not being on the debate stage, even though we've personally said we want to see her on the debate stage, and there's been many stories that we've covered where we had to debunk a lot of these ridiculous articles about Tulsi Gabbard and her character, because all they keep on bringing up is stuff that really doesn't have any ground, most notably her quote-unquote connection to a Koch brother think tank. She was there as an honorary member, but she's not getting any money from the Koch brothers. So unless there's any kind of data or documentation that proves that she is getting money from the Koch brothers,
she isn't, by the way.
Yeah, I agree, and she's not.
No, I'm saying like I can confirm. I was DMing her the other night, and she was telling me while her and her husband and their friends were watching my video, they were getting fired up because she was waiting for somebody to they were waiting for somebody to cover it, and cover it truthfully.
Right.
But she isn't, and that's, like I said, that's just the type of person that Tulsi is. Tulsi, so corporate media, it's almost like nowadays as progressives, we don't really care about your endorsements as much as we do your enemies. Most of the time, an endorsement can hurt you nowadays if you get it from the wrong. Barbara Lee endorsed Kamala. That didn't do anything for Kamala, but it let us know we can't trust Barbara Lee anymore. That's all that did. But whenever the entire establishment media, both left in most of the right, not Tucker Carlson, surprisingly enough, he really likes Tulsi because of the anti-war stance. When everybody in the establishment media is your enemy, I gotta assume whatever you did in your past is not that important, because whatever you're planning to do for us has been confirmed by them constantly attacking you for talking about it. When I would be more convinced that she was a quote-unquote Assad toady, as Barry Wise tried to call her. I would be more sympathetic to that belief if everybody in the mainstream wasn't trying to attack her for it.
Right, and the thing is, what we got to take away from that, statement that was done on the Joe Rogan podcast about Tulsi Gabbard, she was there for a fact-finding mission to find out information about the conflict that was happening in Syria. Her meeting with Assad was accidental, and that's something a lot of media outlets refuse to acknowledge.
Well, not accidental, unplanned.
Yeah, well, unplanned. Thank you for the correction. But the thing is, what we got to take away from that is that when you have somebody doing that, and actually trying to find out information about why we are also involved in a foreign country, it seems that the neoliberal media will constantly keep on attacking that person and tearing them down, because what we forget is that a lot of the corporations that buy our politicians also have investment and ownership over organizations like ABC, CBS, CNN, MSNBC, and yes, including Fox News. But it seems like this narrative is constantly being portrayed about Tulsi Gabbard, that she is all these horrible things, but no one's really acknowledging or asking the questions, well, why is she against military intervention, or why did she go to Syria, when in fact what she's trying to stop is our wasted treasury.
It was interesting that you say that I remember that Morning Joe conversation that Tulsi had, where they were like, well, what do you say to people that claim you're an Assad toady? And I'm like, that's weird. Why didn't you ask why did she go to Syria? Because when people forget that she wasn't the first one to go to Syria out of the leaders in 2011, 2012, right before the conflict started, coincidentally enough, 4 or 5 politicians, Congress members, all went to Syria. But when they say that, they're like, no, it was different. Here's the reason why they went. It's like, oh, hold on. Oh, so now we care about the reason that they went. But when Tulsi went, you don't care about the reason why she went. Interesting. I can tell you the reason that Tulsi went are a lot more noble than the reason they went, because they went to clearly scope out the infrastructure, see how much of a competition they would be, if they would be able to withstand a military strike, because shortly after that, that's whenever the Civil War went into full effect and we started sending humanitarian aid. So, but whenever Nancy Pelosi and all them went, there was absolutely no problem. Because we know, quote unquote, why they went, and that's what's focused on. But with Tulsi, the only thing that's focused on is the fact that she did go and that she did at some point meet with Assad, and it's just disingenuous. But once again, that if she's an enemy of corporate media, that lets me know that she is firmly on our side and not theirs. At the very least, she's against them, so that already wins her point. So
right, and also one thing I've noticed too is that we've said it, as well as numerous other independent media outlets have said it too, that Tulsi Gabbard should be on the debate stage with all the other candidates, because then there you have the anti-war stance as well as some of the other progressive policy issues that I'm going to say perhaps could push Bernie Sanders to the left, because there are some areas in which his campaign is clearly lacking on. And even Jimmy, I'm going to quote Jimmy Dore on this, as well as a few others, a Bernie-Tulsi or Tulsi-Bernie ticket is a winning ticket because they're able to gain not only a lot of support from progressives, but, and this seems a little radical to say at the same time, but also get conservative, Republican, and libertarian supporters.
I don't think that's radical. I think it's necessary. Right. I think it's if you don't think you need libertarians to win an election, you have lost your. The independents are like 70%, like 68% of the country is independent now. Right. Like you have to win them over, and in various ways, both Bernie and Tulsi went over both. And with Tulsi specifically. She needs to get on that debate stage, and I think that she will. I think that it's possible that she won't, but she's getting a town hall this Sunday on CNN, which is surprisingly fair. Like she's getting a whole hour to herself. I couldn't believe it. But she's getting a town hall. Every time they tried to slam her and slander her, it has been so funny because every time you go to the YouTube videos where they try to slander her, the comments are overwhelmingly supportive of Tulsi.
Yeah, and
there are people. Go ahead.
Yeah, and it's also to be important to note that these articles against Tulsi Gabbard are easily debunked. With the Koch brother article or the NBC article,
I'm just referring to just the interviews. If you look at the View interview, the MSNBC interview, the NBC, like every time they have her on, you go to YouTube. 'Cause I like to look at the comment section to see how people are reacting to situations. There was a comment by one woman where she said, "I've never seen this woman before in my life. I've never heard of her before in my life. But for some reason, I trust everything she said." And that says something because, first of all, they didn't bring her on to give her exposure. They brought her on to make sure that everybody associates her with negative smears like the Assad thing, the Hindu nationalism thing, her comments on Venezuela, things like that. That's what they brought her on for. But they always leave. The audience leaves with the opposite impression. They're like, well, this woman seems to have common sense. I don't see what the problem is. So if you've noticed, she's been making much fewer appearances because my inclination is that it's not working anymore. They're like, shit, we got to shut her off. Same thing that happened with Bernie. Remember at first they shut him off. Then they started having him on to try to smear him. And then it didn't work anymore. They were like, shit, we just can't have him on. We're just going to have to smear him. And if that doesn't work, we're going to shut them out again. So it's interesting to me, this phenomena we're seeing where people are, it's almost like a unified conscience of like, we know who's an ally and who isn't. Not saying that they can't make mistakes, because Bernie makes mistakes, Tulsi has made mistakes. Both of them have admitted and still have yet to admit some of them, but for the most part, they're genuine allies. And when we're talking about them, we should always frame that as such. So you can frame a critique of an ally appropriately and still give the critique because it's important to do what you said, move them left. An example of this would be Bernie Sanders. Bernie Sanders, for the first time that I can remember that I've ever seen, during the CNN town hall, refused to call Maduro a dictator. He also refused to say that it needs to be the United States that gives aid to Venezuela. And it needs to specifically be international aid, not in the election to be observed by international bodies, not the United States. That was a big deal and a much bigger deal than what people had thought it was, because before Bernie had basically said that Maduro was a dictator. Right. And that's an example of, once again, being pushed to the left. It isn't the perfect answer, but it is being pushed to the left that will open up the conversation for more progressive analysis.
Right. And now, and the thing is, too, what I want to make very clear is that all of us, I think, we want to see all the candidates on the debate stage, and we also want to critique and vet out who's going to be the strongest candidate to get the nomination. And one of the issues that is that's being brought up is the concern of election fraud. Will it happen again? And who is actually going to really step up and call it out? And already there seems to be polling data that has shown that Bernie Sanders and Biden are beating Kamala Harris and Cory Booker in regards to who would be likely to vote for them. But when it comes down to the final primaries, to where Ohio is going to be the first state, then followed up by New Hampshire, what do we do about this concern of election fraud? Because the 2016 primary is still fresh in a lot of people's minds, and the DNC clearly wants to control the narrative on who's going to get the nomination.
So I want to be very clear on a couple of things. They're aware of election fraud. The Bernie Sanders campaign is. However, they're also aware of the narrative that would have been attached to them. It's not whether I don't really like it. I understand it. That doesn't mean I like it. But they're aware that the narrative would have been, and they even did it anyway. They're sore losers. Hillary won the popular vote, et cetera, et cetera. And because election fraud there's a benefit of election fraud to both the Democrats and Republicans. They championed Stacey Abrams for fighting Republican election fraud, but they don't talk about election fraud in any other capacity. Cynthia Nixon was a victim of election fraud. She was. And they just glossed over it and moved on. Now, I can say this also for a fact. Nina can't talk about it. Now I encourage her to, because it's just going to be a shitstorm. But Nina is not happy about the Democratic Party and their stance on election fraud. She's not. The campaign is not happy. But they are limited because they have to they can expend their energy fighting election fraud, or they can do what basically, I hate to say it, but what Trump did. Trump spent so much energy on why he was electable and all that good stuff that he overcame election fraud in a lot of ways. The Republicans do benefit from interstate cross-check, but that mostly benefits like gerrymandered congressional races and local races. But in Jill Stein's lawsuits, they found that it was Hillary primarily benefiting from election fraud, but she still got her ass handed to her. So like that's what Bernie is trying to seemingly do, which is make the win so insurmountable, have so many people involved in the political process that even if they do try to cheat, it will amount to nothing in the long run, in the grand scheme. By having 1 million volunteers, you have people involved in the election process when people go into the polls. You have people involved in knocking on doors. You have more accountability. You have 1 million guaranteed votes, right, out the gate, and everybody who's related to them or attached to them. But that, once again, the most important aspect of that is that you have volunteer monitors of election fraud. Right. And they pay more attention to that than what people may believe. And so it is important to stay diligent on that issue, because you're right. Election fraud. And once again, shout out to Tulsi, who introduced election fraud legislation. But nobody wanted to talk about it, really.
Okay. Well, Niko, I'm going to give you the final word on that, because first, thank you so much for coming back on our show. We want to do this again because it's quite clear there's going to be more election fraud. There's going to be more stories and more smearing on progressive candidates. And we need a big collaboration of independent media outlets actually talking about this and covering these stories, because corporate media is not going to do it. So for our viewers and subscribers, as we end this interview and this commentary, can you tell us where we can find you on social media and learn more about Just Inform?
So you can find me personally on @Niko CSFB on Twitter. You can find me on YouTube. Obviously, you just type in MCSC Network or Niko House. Either way, my YouTube channel will come up. You can find me on Just Inform as well, which Just Inform is spelled JUSTNFORM. I mean, basically all my social media, if you Google Niko House, NIKOHOUSE, everything will come up, including some articles that I've done with various outlets. All
right. Well, Niko House, we definitely need to do this again. Thank you so much for joining Heartlands Media. He's one of the largest independent media networks that's growing. And I think it's very important that we hear more voices and more perspectives. So, Niko, thank you again for joining us.
Did you like that video? Are you not subscribed? Okay, you are now? Fantastic.